Good time of the day, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on combining object level and row level security in Power BI and Azure Analysis Services. Thank you guys for answering our poll questions. It gives us a good idea of what we need to talk about and focus on. So let's get started. Let's see, this is a slide about us. You can read it when you want to, if you want to. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. We're senior consultants at 3Cloud. We're passionate about Power BI analytics and anything data. And our agenda for today is going to include on what is object level security and why do we need to talk about it? What does it mean for Power BI users? We're going to talk about row level security, and then Brad's going to finish us off with Azure Analysis Services and how that all layers in and how that is implemented in Azure Analysis Services. Okay, and there's going to be a lot of demo time. All right, so before we get started, we're going to spin through this pretty quickly. I'm going to probably take one or two questions after my piece, and Steve's going to follow me on that, and then Brad's going to be there at the end, and we'll allow some time for questions at the end for sure. Okay. So let's talk about object level security first. Objects in Power BI are essentially tables and columns. So, and without sufficient permissions, these objects simply do not exist, right? You cannot see the names of them. You can't access them via DAX, Excel, or any other reporting tool, which is great. Existing measures pointing to these restricted objects also appear. And in Power BI, existing visuals also disappear. And on Power BI, the visuals that point to these measures break. So what does that do? It basically enables model authors to make sure that specific tables are hidden, not just hidden, but they're physically not available. And then it restricts access to data. What type of use cases are we talking about? We're talking about when we use one master data model, and that includes multiple domains so that report developers from different departments can work on developing their respective reports, such as in HR, for example, if you want to hide an employee table or you want to hide a salary column. This is specifically what we're going to discuss and focus on in the demo. And situations like that, perhaps in finance, you need to hide the cost or an amount column or sales, maybe some incentives to be paid out. Brian is going to talk about that in his piece. All right. So this is kind of an important slide, and you can see that it expands here on the right-hand side. So Microsoft continues to, the product team's goal is to unify the features and make Power BI Premium contain all of the features that Azure Analysis Services has and more. As you can see, and I updated this slide last night actually, because everything just changes fast and furious. So the backup and restore functionality that has been in preview since May 2021 for data sets is out there, right? The data set obviously needs to be in premium or premium per user capacity, but it's there and it's available. So some of those features, continue to expand kind of from analysis services into the superset of Power BI Premium. Asynchronous refresh is planned for the second half of 2021, and the query scale out is being evaluated in the context of Power BI Premium Gen 2 architecture. You can read all this on the Microsoft Power BI blog. All right, so little bit, we're going to touch very slightly on row level security. Steve's going to talk about that a little bit more depth, but it enables you to restrict the rows for a specific role in a particular table or a data set, right? Basically, the nice thing about it is filters out the distractions from team members so they don't see their relevant data, and it doesn't break your visuals, right? The visuals still show the data that you need to see, except that in an augmented piece, right? As opposed to object level security that will literally break the visual if if you don't construct it kind of in a way that allows those separate views for separate users. Some of the caveats here for role security: if when a report user is assigned to multiple roles, the filters will become additive. So it automatically will apply filters to all the queries, and this filters may have a negative query performance. That's another caveat. So don't go too gung-ho on the implementing RLS for every single thing. You basically have to think through how you design your model in an optimal way, because there is a tax on the performance side of things. All right. And just really quickly to spin through before you implement, this is a very, very, very important task. And before you implement any of this stuff, object level security or role level security, sit down, not just by yourself, but hopefully with your business users, right? And determine the roles that will define that, like who is going to see what, and what role are they going to be. Talk to your stakeholders, document those decisions, make sure that, and write the documentation as you would write it for yourself if you have a memento moment tomorrow, right? If you don't remember anything, what you talked about yesterday, make sure you have the documentation to refer to so you can quickly remind yourself and be right back where you were. Another best practice is to create Azure Active Directory roles, security groups that you need for implementation. And don't just start adding people there, add some test people there, test resources there first, and do some testing to validate what you need. And then, as I mentioned, update documentation actually after the implementation. It's very important because there's some lessons learned, as experience shows, in implementing something real in real life, and then, writing down those lessons learned right back into documentation. And when you get to the RLS, just kind of rinse and repeat steps 1 through 3. Okay. All right. So before the demo, the last slide I have is to get this all implemented, at least for Power BI. You need the Power BI Desktop March 2021 and later. Just to remind you, these versions come out every month. And you need a Power BI service with dedicated shared capacity so you can publish and test it obviously with users. And you need Tabular Editor. I believe current version is 2016, but you need 2014 and later. So what we're going to do is I'm gonna show the setup of the object level security. Then I'm going to turn over to Steve. Steve's going to do the role level security. And then Brad's going to show us the use case in Azure Analysis Services. Do we have any questions so far, Crystal?
Not that I can see. You guys are still good to go. Let me just double check.
Okay, great. Can you still see my screen?
I can see your Power BI.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's get started with the demo. So this is for how to implement object level security. So what we're going to do is, this is very simple data model. I'm going to show you the data model here. This has, a couple of dimension tables, a couple of fact tables, and we have a DAX measure table that we'd like to build separately. So what we're going to do, we're going to create 3 roles here, right? A role that excludes the employee table altogether. So this table will be gone. We're going to have a role, actually we're going to create 2 roles, I'm sorry. And then the role that excludes the salary view from the employee table. So the salary view, as you can see here, will also be, we'd like to hide that for certain users, right? So the way we're going to do that is, the first thing you do is you go into modeling and you set up the roles under manage roles here. Okay. And in the interest of time, I've already set that up. So it's very easy. You just click on create and the role pops up and you have all the tables. You actually don't really do all that much for these roles. They show all the tables. You see this little tick mark here. What I like to do is I like to write documentation, kind of build it right into the tool. So this is basically all we're doing here is creating a note for ourselves to say that this table will disappear for users in this role, right? And for the salary view column, right, where it says the little tick mark here, it says salary column will also, not be available for users in this role. And that's literally all we do is save it, and we're done. So what we're going to do then is you need to go to external tools and go to Tabular Editor. You can download it from the website and install it. It should install as an external tool. So you click into that, and it's probably going to show up on my other screen. So give me some time to drag that over. Okay, so there it is. So what we need to do right now is we need to validate that our 2 roles are in our semantic model, right? So you can see roles here, and click that, and there they are. So those are the 2 roles that we've created. So now what we need to do is under the no employee table, we go under security, data or table permissions, and here I've already actually changed it, but by default, it'll be all default. So what we need to do is, we obviously don't want the people in this role to see this table, so we're going to change it from default to none, right? So now that should appear under here, right? Under this role, no employee table, the dim employees is showing up, and you can see, this is the text that we created. So that's there. And then the no salary view column role, it's going to be a little bit different. So because we do need to see the table, right? Under table permissions, we need to set it to read. So again, it's going to be default for you initially, and we don't want the none, because in that role we want people to read that table. So we're going to put it to read, and then what we need to do is under dimension employee, so under that role, again, the table will appear. So you need to click on that table right under the role, and then here is where we get access to the OLS column permissions. And you can see, so that we're reading this table, and now we need to go and set that salary. Again, it's going to be default initially for you, so we're going to need to set that to none, right? Okay, and then what we're going to do is save the changes to the connected database here, and we're going to flip back over. We're going to close the tabular editor here, flip back over to Power BI, and let's just demonstrate what excuse me, what this does. So essentially, we're going into the view, into the modeling section again, and we're gonna test these. So I'm gonna expand these for you just so you can see. And first we're gonna test this role. The first one is no employee table, right? So if we click on that role, you can see that there's no employee table anymore here, and any measures that point to any of the columns in that table are basically gone, right? They're not here. They're not in the report view. So there's no employee table, period. Okay. And then all the visuals, right? If you click on these, so for example, I have this other visual here that's it basically would say, hey, I don't see any of the columns here. So if I click on the visual, see all the columns are gone. All right. So now we can stop viewing. And we're going to test the other role. So go view as, no salary view column, and click OK. And you can see the employee table is still there, but the salary column is gone, right? And these two visuals point to the measures that actually they contain the measures that point to the salary view column, the salary column. And since the column is gone, you can validate it here, right? So the employees table is there, but the salary column is gone. If we stop viewing, it pops right back up, right? So and then let's just validate this here on this report as well. So if we do the same thing, go to modeling, view as, no salary view column, boom, the table breaks, right? If you eliminate that, right, it comes right back up because we don't have any restrictions anymore, or the measures that restrict it. But that's how it works, my friends. So I believe that concludes my piece of it. So if you have I can take one or two questions real quick if there are any. Otherwise, I'm going to turn this over to Steve. Crystal, are there any questions in the chat or?
Yeah, you guys got a few. Let's see. Let me go up here.
The only one that I'm seeing here is what's the difference between the default and read access level on the fields that you were showing in the tabular editor?
Yeah.
So when you pulled the drop-down menu, it had read, default, and none.
Yeah, let's open that up and explore that. So the default is there. That's actually a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think the default is just whatever your Power BI data model kind of has there initially. I don't know if there are any other tools that set that up by default, but let's take a look at this one. Steve, do you know anything about that?
I'm assuming default is just read, default is the same as read without it being explicitly set, but I haven't come across a use case where default would be different than read. because it would be hard to know what it is if it's something else, since it's that.
Yeah, typically if you have a default, then you can read any you can read those columns or those objects, those tables as well. All right, well, if there are no other questions, I'm going to turn this over to Steve because I know we got a lot to go through still.
Yeah, and as he's sending it over, and I'll share my screen, I think there's a couple questions coming in and a couple good use cases here that we want to address. And so, imagine yourself in a situation like I'm in right now where somebody sends me a Power BI report. Now, you should be seeing my Power BI report here. Is that correct? Just kind of give me a confirmation, Kirill. You guys see it?
Yep.
So somebody sent me this report. I'm co-developing with somebody else. This is the same report Kirill was showing in the beginning. And object level security has already been set up on this report. One of the reasons why we suggest putting some information up in the managed roles is because if you didn't open Tabular Editor, you would have no way of knowing that object level security has been set up on this report. So we kind of talked through a couple use cases, but here we at least like to say, hey, somebody set this up. We'll show what happens here in a minute. But I want to come back. We're going to talk about row level security. And as Kirill showed, object level security is helping us to make a column and its corresponding metadata disappear. So although we can see salary on this model view, when we apply object level security, an end user connecting to this data will not see this column header, will not see the column data. The column is effectively gone. And we can do the same thing with the table. And this is why the model can break. Is because measures or relationships based on those columns will essentially be broken and your visuals break. Row level security has been around in Power BI since probably 2017 and is available to all users. Premium Pro, that question came up. It's effectively what we're doing is now making rows disappear, and we can apply it across all columns equally. So we can't specify which column we want row level security to apply to. It applies to all columns in that table uniformly, but we can address the roles. And we don't need to apply row level security to every table in this model. There's only 4. The 2 that we really want to address are the ones on the one side of the relationship. So think about if we apply a role to this table, it's going to filter this table. And if we apply a role to this table, it's going to filter our fact table, our target table. So there's really only 2 things we need to apply to. And this model is a little complicated because it's not just a simple, I'm going to give you permission to see North region, and then I put a simple static security. This is dynamic row level security. That means that we're going to look at who signed into Power BI and apply their username to filter the data that they can see. And one good way of doing that is to put the actual entitlements in the report. So I have a table here called employee assignments. This means that one employee can have access to multiple stores. You could have multiple stores having one employee. There's a lot of different combinations that can go, but I've put all of the actual permissions in the table itself. So if we look at this table, it's just the store ID and the employee ID. I've got another table that has it's my dim employees table, so 1 row per employee. This has the email address in it. This is what we need. So we need to take information from this table and filter this dim stores table. And if we look at that dim stores table explicitly, you'll notice that there's actually no information in here about what employee is working at the store. So we can solve all this with row level security. We're not going to go into the depth of the actual DAX that's used here, but when we go to manage roles, when we write row level security, we've created these roles. The names are helpful. These roles, once they're created, are going to be published to the service. So once you kick off row level security, you have to follow up with it. If you get a report that's been published and somebody created roles but didn't do anything with it, the report actually won't work for users in a viewer role in that Power BI workspace. So here we've got our roles. I'm just looking at a couple of them here. There's no salary view. This is the one we talked about with object level security. And we have a salary view role. And you'll notice I've applied some filters. So I've applied row level security to 2 of these tables, the 2 that I talked about, dim employees and dim stores. The dim employees is a simple one, right? All we're gonna do is take user principal name and filter that employee table down to whoever's logged in, right? I don't want somebody to be able to access that table and see all the other employees in the organization unless they're allowed to. So I'm going to filter that table to just the user that signed in, and we're using user principal name, which is the function that grabs that field out of Power BI when the user signed in and puts it into the table. So all I've done is set that. To filter dim stores, remember, we need to take that email address that's been handed over here, and we need to pass it through this employee assignments. We need to ask ourselves, what stores is this employee allowed to see? And then we need to pass that information to this table. So who's logged in, what stores are they allowed to see, and then filter this table to the stores that that employee has access to. So it sounds really easy when we think about it like contextually. When we actually look at the DAX that takes place to do that, I've done it two ways. So this is basically a platform for writing DAX. So I made this purposefully a little bit more complex to show you the scale of what we can do with row-level security. I can write a variable. This variable is going to my employees table. It's looking at who's logged in, and it's filtering the employees table to just the user that's logged in. So go to the employees table, who's logged in, filter that table to one row, and give me back the employee ID. And then let's use a lookup value, go to my employee assignments table and filter it using that employee ID and return to me the stores that that person has access to. And this is me applying the DAX. I know it works because if I hit the check mark, I would get an error if this was incorrect DAX. And so we have one formula. Here's flavor number 2, same exact function. We're gonna go to the employee table. We're gonna get the user that's logged in. And now instead of using the lookup value and a filter with a variable, I'm using the in operator. So I'm saying the store number should be in, and this function right here is just returning a single column table with the store IDs of the person, whatever this person has access to. And if you're looking at this and you're like, oh man, this is complex DAX, you don't see this as much online because most of the RLS documentation is very simple, like we're gonna give you access to the United States. So we're extending it a little bit to show you what's possible. So these both work. Let's show how to test it now. So we're in the service, or we're in Power BI desktop. I'm gonna come to view as roles. Here's my roles. Remember, this is specific to each individual user. So if I wanna show somebody that's in the no salary view role, here I need to explicitly type in their email. This is what is in that employee table. This no salary view is the one with object level security set up, right? They're not allowed to see the salary. Watch what happens when I try and test it. So the name of this presentation is kind of a misnomer because right now you cannot combine object level security and row level security in Power BI. It doesn't like that. It gives us this error that says we can't do it. And so this role salary view actually doesn't have any object level security. And with this email typed in here, this overrides that user principal name function and it puts this email address in it. So when I test this role, you'll see that my data is now filtering. If I come over here, you'll see that my dim stores table has filtered, my employee assignments table has filtered, and my dim employee table, it's following. We can actually see the row level security in action like we could with object level security. And if I stop viewing that role, I'll get all the tables back. So you should actually be able to test everything in Power BI desktop and know that it works long before it goes to the service. Once you publish this to the service, you should expect the same functionality that you can see here, which is like if I type in an email address of a user at my fictitious company and they are allowed to see this and it filters correctly here, then when you go to the service, it should filter correctly as well. The only reason why it wouldn't filter correctly in the service is because that individual is given too much privilege in the workspace that this report has been shared to. And as Kirill noted in the PowerPoint presentation, if you are a member or a contributor or an admin of a workspace, row level security does not apply to you. So as you're sharing information out, if you have somebody sitting in one of those 3 roles, if they're in anything other than viewer, row level security is not going to work. They're going to see everything. So it kind of overrides the row level security function as it is. And so that's kind of a quick demo. I know this is pretty in depth about like some of the DAX that's going here, But it's much to just show you, number one, that object level security and row level security don't play well together in Power BI. The other piece is that you can go and put some pretty good DAX into your row level security format here. This is actually true DAX formulas and measures that just are operating on this data as it's loaded in. So the sky's the limit with what you can write here. As Kirill said, this could actually slow down your report, so be mindful of what you put here, but certainly this is how you can implement row level security in that file. All right, what I'm going to do now is pass this over to Brad, who's going to kind of carry the journey on into Azure Analysis Services.
All right, hopefully you guys can hear me and you can see my screen.
Yep, we got you.
All right, I'm going to try to move this thing over here to another screen there. Okay, so I've got a ton of stuff to cover. It gets technical at times, so I'm just gonna jump into it and hopefully you guys can follow along. I'm praying to leave, maybe about 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes or so left at the end, so hopefully I can get through all of this. So I'm flashing back to the deck just because I wanted to highlight over what this role breakout looks like. Now I'm not gonna go through each one of these, but this at least, and you guys can download this and see it, so you can kind of follow along and understand, what roles contain what. But basically, there in general, there's three kind of categories. There's like a stacked category, a group category, and a stacked and group category. So we talked about how RLS and OLS couldn't be combined, but I'm going to give you some strategies about how you can combine them. And from the poll, I saw a lot of people are using Power BI, so I'm going to demo this through Power BI, and then I'm going to flash over to Analysis Services and kind of show you guys where that exists in Analysis Services. The last bit of slide for your resources, right? I wanted to show some of these restrictions, and this thing with this big rejected thing over top of it. I'm going to kind of show some strategies for getting around this, but this is what Microsoft is actually giving as far as guidance when combining row and object level security, and some of the reasons why there are some blocks, right? Because you're allowing unintended ambiguous access to potentially to specific data if you don't know what it is. Now, one thing I will say is that this particular stop that's occurring inside of the Model 1500 version is purely a soft stop. So programmatically, this is circumventable, right? So I wanted to at least flash to those slides and allow you guys to see, like, you can reference this as I'm talking through some of the demo. All right. So I wanted to first set the stage, right, with what exactly we're doing here, right, to try to give an idea of why you would need to do some of these things in certain situations. So the idea here is that you have like maybe a varying level of cost in your organization, right? So let's say you have some kind of display cost and you have some kind of actual cost. Actual cost being something that you're managing your inventory by, whereas display cost is kind of what you're giving to your salesmen so they don't give away the farm, so to speak, when they're discounting products to customers, right, in order to gain business. And maybe perhaps you have some kind of incentive program for, hey, there's more sales coming out of this particular region versus this region. And maybe you have salesmen that have customers that cross regions. So you don't want, salesman A and B to be fighting over the same customer that just happens to be located in 2 different regions. So ideally, you want to be able to create like a single security method for all the people in your organization, right? So you can create one report and then everybody can access that one report and only see the information that they should be able to see, right? This gives, less disruption, for your user base and less maintenance work on you, right? I mean, obviously that's what we're trying to achieve here, right? It also creates that single source of truth, right? So people aren't singing off of different sheets of music. But this doesn't always happen, right? Because you have storage challenges, or there might be maintenance work, or there might be some kind of trade-off, right? And I'm going to go through some of those instances, right? So I guess it boils down to exactly where you want to put your work, right? And we'll cover off that some in the conclusion. I think that Steve was 100% correct in that I think the best way to do this, right, to manage these roles is through a table, right, to where you define specific users, right, whatever their 80 UPNs are, and then give them their access, right? So like, and what this allows you to do is to manage, right? Let me kind of zoom in here. That might be a little small. So like you can see here, I've got, you know, I've got like an 80 UPN here, and then their product category, right? Like what category that particular person has access to, right? So that kind of helps keep everything straight. Additionally, this allows you to do sort of BI on BI, right? So like you could do a security analysis to see who has access to what columns and what records and so forth, right? So that helps you kind of keep everything straight, right? Additionally, I'm going to go through a couple of demos where I've changed some of the data structures to sort of stack RLS. So without getting too much into the roles, I guess I'll just flash through this a little bit. I want to show some of this DAX, right? So this is a little bit of a different structure that than Steve showed. And the biggest reason is that I have this sort of chunk here, right? And I call it a not contains. And what this does, this says like, hey, if a particular user doesn't exist in a table with specific rows or objects that they have access to, then give them access to everything in that table, right? Now, one thing that I kind of work a lot with is security at scale, right? So imagine you had hundreds of thousands of rows in this table, right? So rather than going through and seeing if a person has access to a particular row across that 100,000 row table, right? That takes a lot of memory to read that in, right? You're going to have to read in the entire table and only return the rows that that person have access to. Well, this not contains kind of gives you a little bit of a bypass, right? It's sort of like a highway, right? Or a beltway, if you will, right? So like you could say, hey, look, this guy's an admin, so I'm just not going to put him in the security table. So I'm going to allow him to kind of bypass this entire lookup value, right? The same thing that existed in Steve's part, right? He used principal name. I'm using username. So a similar function that grabs the user of the the username of the person that's logged into a particular Power BI report or Power BI service, and then I'm just matching it against a particular table, right? And then this table obviously is related to the fact table, and then that's what ends up giving its filters. All right. Now, like I said, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on these roles, but know that there's 3 distinct scenarios here. All right, and I'm going to go through each one. So without further ado, let's start getting into that. The first scenario, and hopefully you can kind of see this, and this isn't too small, right? Is inside of the service, right? I've got all these roles set up, and I have this person, right? This is a bike data set. So this is the AdventureWorks data set. So this is the Multinational Riding Corporation, or MRC, right? They do business all over the world. And this is, and I have these users, right? So like I have these test users that I'm adding to each of these particular groups, right? So, so the first step, right, is I'm going to say, hey, this guy's an account manager, right? So that's why he's getting put into the account manager role, right? Now, when I log in as him, right? So let's just zoom in. You can see I'm logged in as MRC test user 2, right? You can see the same kind of scenario here, right? Where the entire table is blocked out, right? Now, a lot of times that's not really cool, right? That makes your user think that, hey, there's a problem here, right? There's a problem with this report. Maybe this visual is broken. They may not necessarily know that it's a particular problem with the level of security, right? So how do I give these people access? Well, the idea there is that maybe we could stack these roles together, right? So like I'm going to say this account manager guy, right? So now I'm going to add add this guy to sales AC. So let's add MRC test user 2 to sales AC. Remember AC being actual costs, right? So now I'm allowing them to see, some actual costs. I'm going to hit save, right? And the error that's going to come up here, right, is a query user error. And the reason that error, if you remember back to the deck where I had that big rejected stamp, right? It's because of allowing access. Let's see that saved. So I'm going to hit refresh, right? And then I'm going to get this pop-up error, right? It's saying, hey, you have this query user error, right? says the combination of active roles is not supported, right? And the reason you're getting this error is because of that Microsoft Docs thing, right? So how do we get around this, right? So how do I say like, hey, you know, this guy is an account manager, but he does have AC. So basically what I did is I took these individual roles, account manager AC and account manager and sales DC, let me do this here. Oh, let me do this one and these two, right? So I said, hey, these are my stacked ideas, right? So maybe I want to give them both. And then I just combined them into one, right? So I said, hey, account manager AC. This is the account manager role plus the sales AC role, right? And then DC is the display cost role plus the display cost security, right? So let's remove him from here. So let's save that. Okay. And then I'm going to remove him from the account manager role. Okay. Then I'm going to add him to this DC role. Right. Mercy test. And I hit save. Right. Wait till that finishes saving, and then I'm going to refresh, and we're going to get a similar experience, right, to the first account manager role, where we're still going to get blocked out, right? We're still going to get blocked out of that particular cost because that column doesn't exist, right? There's an object level security that exists there on the DC role, so the visual is still broken, but you can see all the other visuals, right? They're only showing my row level security, right? Now, if I switch him over to AC, now this is going to be a little bit of a wild card. So I tested this yesterday and I tested this morning. And sometimes when I'm switching back and forth between all these roles so frequently, the service gets a little confused. And sometimes I have to republish. So let's just let's see what happens here. So now I've added him to the AC role. So now let's hit refresh. Yeah, see, it's not going to work. So essentially, what needs to happen, right? Let me do a quick sign out and sign back in. Sometimes you need to do this in order to. Oh, it's going to ask for a password. Let me put in a password real fast. I might need to republish. Hopefully I don't, but we'll see. Yeah, I'm going to need to republish. So let's do that real fast. And the idea here is that he'll be able to see only his roles, right? Plus the AC, plus the rows that he can see, right? So that visual will be populated, but it'll only be a couple of rows, right? So it'll just be the rows that he has access to in that particular role itself, right? So let's hit refresh real fast. I might need to log out and log back in again. And if this doesn't work, then I'm going to move on. But just know that it will populate those two records. Yeah, it's telling me that there's unrecognized fields. Either way, this will populate those two records in this table and only show you these bulk discount code in each side department store, right? So it'll look like this, but it'll only have those two particular rows, right? So it's a way of combining those two values into a single role. Right. So let's just say that maybe this isn't good, right? So maybe this isn't something that I want to do. maybe this, I can see this being too many, like too many roles to manage. Maybe I have a person, or too many people in my organization that wear too many hats in order to create that many roles to manage each one of the particular things that each person needs to see. All right, so let's talk about maybe a different way to approach this. All right, so I'm gonna sign out, and I'm gonna sign in as MRC test 1. Right, so let's use another account. Let's use MRC test user 1. Right, gotta love multi-factor authentication here. And now it's going to give me a phone call. Maybe quickly. There we go. And we're approved. Okay. So now we're logged in as MRC test 1, right? So now I'm going to show kind of a cool way of doing this, right? So right now, the MRC test 1 has this sales RLS role. Now inside this sales RLS role, right, is a is kind of a different data structure, right? So I created another fact table, right, called sales ACDC, right? And it's no coincidence that I picked AC and DC. Maybe somebody should name a band after them. But the idea here is that I created a column inside that particular fact table called secure column group, right? So basically inside my data, right? Oh, let me hit cancel. Inside my data, I picked up this table. I think it's this one. Yeah, let's scroll to the right here. Yeah, so see I have this secure column group here, right? And you can see that it's filled with AC and DC, right? And you can see kind of flip-flops, right? So like when it's AC, actual cost is populated and display cost is not populated. Whereas when it's DC, actual cost is blank and display cost is populated, right? So basically by doing this, by creating this kind of structure, right? I've pivoted the column to a row, right? Now the reason that's important is because if from a row level security standpoint, I can stack row level security and it'll be additive and it'll give the user the superset of all the rows that they have access to, right? So this is kind of the magic, right, in circumventing the lack of OLS and RLS support. All right, so let me kind of show you what this looks like, right? So like it's called ugly, right? And I'll explain the ugly and elegant here in a minute. But the idea here is look at this, right? So now we have this thing here, right? So like, wow, what is that, right? So like even though they don't have access to the data of actual costs, right? The visual doesn't blow up, right? I can still see the other numbers, right? And the reason is I'm not actually getting rid of that object. I'm just getting rid of that data, right? So like basically I'm giving you data level access, right? So this is cell level access to that particular row. But because that row's actual cost is blank, because I'm only giving them display cost, right? That way I can still show this visual and I can still create one report to rule them all, so to speak, right? And you can see all the other, right? All the other levels of access are still good, right? I'm only seeing the product categories I'm supposed to see. I'm only seeing the customers I'm supposed to see, and I'm only seeing the costs I'm supposed to see, right? So this is a lot more visually pleasing than when you just eliminate a table altogether. So let's just think, how do we eliminate a table altogether? Well, in Ugly Addy, right? So this is an address table. So I added a table to the model that was just purely addresses, right? And I said, hey, I'm just going to equals false, right, in the DAX, right? So if we go back to our roles, oh, let me hit cancel. If we go back to our roles, right, and we go into sales RLS, right, you can see customer address, right? The DAX there is just equals false, right? So basically all that says is, hey, you can't see anything in this table. You might be able to see the table, but you can't see any data, right? So that's why this I can still see the columns, right? See at the top, I can still see the columns associated with that table, but I can't see any of the data associated with that table, right? And this is still live. So like, let me just say like, hey, I'm gonna add MRC test 1, to customer Addy, right? So let's add that back in, hit save, right? And then we'll go to ugly Addy, and then we'll hit refresh. And lo and behold, right? Now I see the only 2 rows that I'm supposed to see, right? So now I have this RLS and table level OLS combined in 2 roles added to the same person, right? So just in that stacked, ideology there, right? You're getting the superset of that total row level security, right? So this is a way or a method, right, to overcome some of that disparity between using OLS and RLS simultaneously. Now, one thing I will say, right? So like, there's a lot of caveats here. So I'm gonna close this. I'm gonna exit them out of there, right? And I want to go back to the main one here. So let's, because there's several caveats that I need to make sure I call out, right? That are potential deal breakers, right? So when you look at this here, right, you see how like I have these adjusted columns, right? Freight adjusted, total due adjusted. Whereas in the elegance, right, I only see total due and display costs. Now, one of the reasons for that is because I've duplicated this data, right? Because that's what I've done, right? I've taken, however many 50 rows and made it 100 rows, right? Because I've duplicated this data. So now all the columns that are not secure, right? So like for instance, tax, freight, total due, right? All these values are duplicated again, right? So inside of each one of these measures, right? I've got to now do a calculate, right? Where I hit the wrong button. Where I do a total due where this secure column group equals a certain thing, right? So again, it kind of comes down to trade-offs and where you want to use certain things. And I know I'm pushing time. I'm 2 minutes over. So and I didn't cover half the stuff half the technicalities that will exist here. But I want to make sure I leave open time for questions. So I don't know how I can't see the questions. So I don't know if somebody wants to look at that. Yeah.
We've been firing back some responses as they've come in, but as we come to the close of this, anyone that's got a lingering question, throw them in that question box and we'll kind of wrap them up at the end of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brad, keep going. I've got a couple of questions for you, just only a couple specifically for your portion there, but yeah, you still have something to cover.
Yeah, so I see the Teams chat, but for some reason I can't see the questions part.
I just put a couple for you.
But yeah, it says I like the idea of not, right. However, it seems to thwart the rule of least privilege. That is, if a new column is added, it would be default by every role. Column is not excluded. And yes, it does thwart the rule of least privilege. But again, like it comes down to this purpose of this highway, right? Like we talked about a performance tax, right? So like if you have report developers or citizen developers in a certain functional area, or maybe you have a person in a functional area that does reports for several functional areas, right? You want to make sure they have not necessarily unfettered access to data, but not necessarily so many guardrails and rules and roads that they have to travel that it takes them forever to drag and drop in columns and create reports, right? Because that's not necessarily the experience any developer wants to do, right? So the not contains is sort of a trick, right? To get people, data level access fast, right? So yes, I do agree that it kind of flies in the face a little bit of least privilege, but it also gives this this trade-off of performance, right? I see another comment there. In other words, for data sets that are built on-prem SSAS, that will be accessed via direct query from Power BI. Yeah, so from a query perspective, I mean, every time, so let me just pull up, I don't know if I'm still sharing my screen or not.
You are.
Okay, so inside of AAS, let me just open up this model.bim here, right? So the same kind of stuff exists, right? So let me just edit this role, right? So inside of AAS, right, you can still see this the way these DAX filters, right, are built, right? So let me just do this. The not contains is still there, right? And if you, I know it's hard to see, right in here, right, that little the or statement. So you could also, I guess from a least privilege perspective, you could just list every single row that person has access to. Just know that they're going to have to run through the entirety of the table before they're able to see what they're supposed to see. But for data sets that are built in SSAS, you get a similar interface, right, for managing these roles. And the direct query, I guess the DAX query back to analysis services, back to the engine that exists there, is still the same kind of query that Power BI service is making back to a Power BI data set, right? The model versions are exactly the same. It's model version 1500. So the same type of experience is going to exist. But for row level security and object level security in SSAS, you're gonna manage that all here, right? So your tables and columns, instead of the tabular editor where it says default none and read, you're gonna be actually just checkboxing things, right? If they can't see, basically this is the not version, right? So you can't see anything, right? So if I said this role can't see product, then I would check the entire product table, right? If I said that this particular role can't see unit price, then I would just check unit price, right? So that would be a RLS, right, here in this role, combined with an OLS, right, on this same role inside of analysis services. So I don't know if that helps anyone kind of understand how to do the two together and how they work in connection with Power BI. So, so any other questions?
So I think we have a couple. Steve, do you want to take those? I think I sent them off to you there in our chat.
Yeah, for those who aren't able to see it, we've had a couple questions come in about, how does it help the end user if you try to combine OLS and RLS and it breaks the visual? And as you're seeing here, it really doesn't help the end user. And if you're going down the road of thinking you need to combine OLS and RLS, it's going to require a lot of testing before that goes anywhere. And as you can see with what Brad's presented, it's possible to circumvent that. There are ways to enable through whether you, as Brad was demonstrating, or others, you can kind of get around it, but it comes with a lot of caveats and a lot of words of warning to make sure that what you expect to happen is going to happen. And so I would just make sure if you find yourself in that, with asking yourself those questions, I need to combine these, just make sure you do plenty of testing out of that. Also, question came up about row level security of the roles. How does being a member of multiple roles impact once you get to the service? From a sheer row level security standpoint, the roles are combined. So you're given access to everything that you have access to based on the combination of those two roles. Now, if your roles are written as Brad did, where he says is a not, it's going to play a little differently than if your roles are written where it's giving you explicit permission to certain things. So it depends how you're writing your rules, but from all intents and purposes, if you're given access to two roles, you're going to have whatever those two roles permit you to have in combination. If one is taking it away and one is giving it back, it's likely going to, it's a curiosity to see how that might combine it. But
it's an and combine, right? So it's going to give you this role and this role. It's going to give you the superset, right? So it's going to give you both, right? Contrary to what happens maybe in a Cognos environment or a DB2 environment where it's an or concatenation, right? So there's a big distinction there, right? But I think that if you were to ask me okay, what's the best way to go about doing this? I would say probably this type of scenario, right? Where you end up managing more roles than trying to manage this stack. And the reason I say that is because when you start stacking roles together for different people, you don't really have business roles. You just have like 1,000 different security profiles, right? So like you could end up with 2 people in the same department that have different levels of stacked access and trying to compare reports with each other and getting 2 different numbers, right? So like it's sort of it's not disinformation, right? It's just one person can see more than the other, right? So you really have to manage through a lot of that, a lot of those issues if you go with this profile type approach, right? If you go with a business role type approach, you can at least manage that through one specific Active Directory group, right? Because you saw me, I was dropping in people, I was dropping in a person into each of these things, but really those should be groups, Active Directory groups of people, like mail-enabled security groups, to help manage some of the maintenance, right, of the group, right? So I think that would be more of my recommendation about how to go about doing this. Now you may end up with like 50 different roles, right? So I mean, it's all about where you want to do some of your work, right? But the other thing too is to be mindful of is this data, like the way this data structure is laid out, right? If you've got 1 million rows of data and you decide to secure 3 columns, you all of a sudden have 3 million rows of data, right? So I know storage is cheap, but just something to think about, as you're spinning through this entire web, I guess, of security.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. That's a very good point. So we're all pretty much at time. I want to be respectful of people's time. So there are questions. Some of the questions are kind of very specific, but so feel free to reach out to any one of us via social media or via 3Cloud sources. We can, certainly help you guys out with the different things. I do want to see if we can answer one more question though. Steve, there's a question. It says that we have set up visuals using row level security. However, the sign-in user chooses to export the data to Excel. All of the rows are exported. Can the visual and the exported data be set to the same? What have you seen in your practice on that?
Did Steve?
Steve might have.
I think Steve had a hard stop at 11.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we will.
But to that question, right? I mean, I think there's some settings inside of the tenant about underlying data sets. So
yes.
So I would be mindful of those settings, right? Typically, you don't allow build permissions or underlying data set permissions on a particular data set. If you allow summarized data sets, it'll only export what they should be able to see, right?
Yeah. Check the Power BI tenant settings. It should be somewhere there.
Yeah. I think there's also some publish settings, right? So like be mindful of who's allowed to author and publish, because they can inadvertently allow data access where they shouldn't, right?
Yeah, perfect.
There's other information protection stuff too that you can explore.
That's right. All right. Well, thanks everyone who's been here. Crystal, I'm going to turn this over to you to wrap this up. We really appreciate your time and thanks for hanging out with us.
All right, thank you guys so much for hosting. And as everybody usually knows, but if you don't, you guys will receive the recording of this webinar tomorrow in your email box around noon Eastern Standard Time. If you guys have any questions for any reason, please feel free to reach out to myself or any of the presenters. You guys can follow us on all of our social media pages to keep up with, webinars, new updates, and everything like that. I hope you guys have enjoyed the webinar, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your Tuesday. Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.
Yep. Thanks a lot. Cheers, guys.